So I think your question actually has a number of different areas I'd like to address. First of all, our state school Safe Schools Task Force was made up of people from a number of different agencies, and we looked specifically at what we could do to support that, the whole concept of the climate of a school being better and conducive to an educational learning environment. It's easy to say that, but to really get there, you really have to do, and I'm going to go back to it again, you have to do training across the board for teachers and administrators, and I want to connect that to another proposal that we have, which is to establish an office of community and parent involvement. We do not have a focused office on that, and much of what you've said connects to what happens with parents and students in the classroom and at school. So I think it's very important that we help and support schools across the state to have a respectful environment for students. One of the things that I do know, if students aren't in school, they cannot learn. If students aren't in school, they can't learn. It makes sense, but we have to often say that to ourselves. And there are a number of models that have been used to address the issue that you're talking about, which is what is it you can do when a student is misbehaving that doesn't automatically have them exiting the school building, but rather doing other things. And there are many models that have been very successful. And part of the work that needs to be done, I believe, in New York is finding those excellent pockets of great work and sharing that with others. And the strategies that are used in school sites that have particular engagement of their students with their teachers, who have a relevant kind of curriculum where teachers are using the kinds of strategies in the classroom that get kids involved in it in a way that they have positive interactions with each other in a respectful way, that creates that kind of environment. And we are expanding to a school climate index. We believe that that's a really critical way of knowing how well students are interacting in that school. If the climate is a hot climate and it's not one that, and I don't mean, a hot place, I'm talking about a hot climate where people are just ready to go after each other, then that is not conducive to a good educational environment. So we are instituting, as part of our Safe Schools work, a climate survey for schools so that we know and they know what they need to address to create that kind of learning environment that is conducive to an education.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to note that we've been joined by Senator Leroy Comrie.
We've also been joined by Assemblyman Murray and Assemblyman Lopez.
Thank you. Assemblyman Mosley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the Commissioner for all your work you've done in such a short period of time. It's a pleasure to have been working with you. Also, like to thank the Board of Regents as it relates to the My Brother's Keeper initiative. The question that I had, first and foremost, not a question. As a parent of a third grader, my son who always tells me, Dad, I got Sunday school, I have regular school, I have Saturday school, when do I ever get a chance to get out of school? To him, I think it'll be refreshing to let him know that the testing, the rigors of the testing that he anticipates taking this year and the subsequent years ahead of him will be a little bit less. So I have some good news to bring back home to Brooklyn. But as it relates to the My Brother's Keeper initiative, and I guess it falls in line with what was said earlier in regards to the 40% reduced SED staffing. When it comes to the recommendations that were made by Regent Young and the panel, who I'm thankful for all their work and allowing me to be a part of that along with some of my colleagues here, the $52 million that was attached to those recommendations, if we don't get the full $52 million, how would you prioritize what would be the most significant recommendations that need to be funded in order for us to carry on and making sure that all that work that was done was not in vain?
Well, as you pointed out, there were a number of initiatives in there. I think one of the key things, and I've had this conversation with Regent Young, one of the key things is to establish that office of community and parent involvement. That will help us to then work individually in those particular districts that we know could use a lot of support in this area and develop those kind of connections that ultimately gets back to the concept of community schools that we earlier talked about in response to Chair Nolan's question. Because the parent and community involvement is occurring in some places really, really well. And we've got to use those as models, get that word out, and help districts who are struggling with that to be able to connect better with their families. So I would say that was one of the first ones that was particularly important. There was also a concept in here to look at what are those strategies that we can influence districts to put in place to support a opportunity for college, from cradle to college, and really work in connecting what happens in pre-K through kindergarten, through the first 5 years, into middle school and into high school, and connecting students. The way that you make sure that every kid is successful is you know who they are, you know the issues that they're facing, and you work to support them. Regent Young put together some great panels. A number of you were there, and you saw and heard students talking about what made a difference in their life. And the biggest thing that I came away from there with was that students themselves needed to feel connected to people in their environment who cared about them. And one of the things that was in the proposal was to incentivize school districts to move forward on this My Brother's Keeper Challenge and implement this cradle to career strategy aimed at improving those outcomes for boys and men of color. And we would do an RFP, put funding out there, and then have the community and parent engagement office work closely with those districts to support those programs. Okay, my follow-up question then is, given the lack of staffing at SED, would that have an influence in terms of what would be a priority if we were to be fully funded? So how much of the resources that would be allocated, if we were to be fully funded to $52 million, would be allocated towards making up for the lack of personnel at SED, and how much would not be required to deal with that 40% lag in SED staffing? Well, so if you're talking about establishing that office, that would come obviously through this agenda, right? We talked about a development of exemplary school models and practices that are supportive of cultural diversity, and that would be one. The other one that I talked about was to incentivize school districts and their work, and one that was particularly supportive is the Teacher Opportunity Corps to fund programs for the expansion of of working to get minority teachers into our classrooms. This is a national crisis. We certainly are affected by it in New York State, and it is really a critical thing as a way to support our students who are in our schools, but then support the future of our schools to make sure that we have teachers that are there that are from the communities and working with our students. So to get to your question, I think that what we would do is we would prioritize this as an agenda. Clearly the regents have identified that as an important agenda and included it in their recommendations for this group. Well, thank you, Commissioner. As a former teacher and someone who taught under Dr. Lester Young as my district manager, I want to thank you again for what you're doing for young boys and young men of color throughout New York State. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to note that we've been joined by Senator Valmanette Montgomery, and our next speaker is Senator George Latimer.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Commissioner, good to see you this morning. hopefully not into the afternoon, but that's been known to happen here. I have a couple of questions on the universal pre-K proposals that the executive branch has put out, and to get your sense and the sense of the Department and the Board of Regents. The governor's proposal sets a precedent by staffing the pre-kindergarten board with staff from the Office of Children and Family Services, which is a departure from what we would have expected, which is that the State Education Department would provide that type of backup staffing. And tied into that, the $28 million of the competitive grant program is to be decided by a board that's made up of the governor and the majority legislative leaders. What is the sense that you have as to whether this departure is wise? How does that position the State Education Department in both of these two areas, both how the board is supported and how the grants are to be allocated?
Well, I appreciate that question. I'm very concerned about anything that would pull apart or complicate and make more siloed decisions about anything related to education, but particularly pre-K. And let me expound on that a bit. So you are putting in a pre-K program. You currently have 6. This is a projection and a possibility of the 7th going and being funded. All 6 have different requirements. So if you're thinking that you have a consistent pre-K program across the state of New York, you don't. Pre-K, the whole purpose of a pre-K program is to connect students to what they will face in kindergarten. And if in fact a board that is not associated with the state ed department would be making decisions about grant money, about what's going to be done in those programs, how it would be connected, it just doesn't make sense. If you put a program in place and it's connected, the purpose of the pre-K, which we're trying to make sure that it is connected in every school district and in every school, whether it's done in a community-based setting or a school district setting, that it's connected to kindergarten. That teachers from pre-K talk to the teachers in kindergarten, that there is a smooth transition for children. And if you have a separate board, you are working against that goal.
If I may, just one other question, Madam Chair. Different direction, overall picture. Board of Regents advocated for $2.1 billion in education spending this year. The executive budget has $991 million. The Board of Regents called for, of that $2.1 billion, full restoration of the GEA, which is a position that's taken by the tripartisan members of the Senate and many members of the Assembly as well, and also add significantly to the foundation aid, significantly over what's in the executive budget. We are living under a tax cap world. If we do not add significantly in those areas, what do you think the realistic expectation will be of how districts will be able to meet the various goals that we've set before them?
Well, obviously, I'm very concerned about it, and I've had conversations with a number of the groups that represent the parent groups, the PTAs, the superintendents, the teacher groups, and the school board groups. And when you talk individually to superintendents, they are very aware of exactly what that means. And also, I'm sure you've seen a number of the articles that when you have a 0.12 increase, and that's going to bring you approximately $60,000 increase, and you know that your benefit increase is even more than that, you're already starting behind. And then we're saying that we need to do much more to bring success to our kids. So I'm very concerned about the foundation aid and think that it is absolutely a critical expenditure, and understand that we need to make sure that the best and the most important asset that we have in developing a strong state is our children and the education system in preparing our kids for what they're going to do when they walk out of high school. And we're not doing that as well as we need to, and I believe that those investments are critical.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much. Assemblyman Graff.
Hi, Commissioner, how are you?
Hi there.
I have so many questions, and the good news is I'm limited to 10 minutes. The good news for me is you're not limited. So I'm going to go through a whole bunch of concerns that I have, and hopefully
Okay, well,
you
let me
can
write
address
them
the
down as you
concern.
go.
So we've already established that we're going to be using the Pearson tests again, but you're going to modify them.
This is muffled, I'm not quite
Sorry,
sure.
the Pearson tests, we're going to be using them, but you're going to modify them.
Yes.
Okay, one of the big problems with the Pearson tests were they disregarded IEPs. So when you have students with learning disabilities, we may do guided learning, and they weren't able to do that. So that was a big concern throughout the state. The other thing is the developmental appropriateness and also the age appropriateness of a lot of the tests. And I was hearing that if a kid was chronologically in 5th grade, okay, but developmentally in 1st grade, they were trying to test them at a higher level. And the answer the state gave was, we'll give them more time to take the test. So that's a concern that I have with the testing. The other thing with the testing is we're not counting it against the teachers. We're not counting it against the students, okay? Why give the test? And are the tests sole purpose to examine whether or not you're going to put the schools into receivership? Okay, is that what we're using the test for? Because they're not counting it to children, not counting it to students. The other thing is I want to make sure there's not going to be any punishment, because I predict we're going to have a big opt-out movement this year. Okay, and I don't want to see schools punished because parents decide to opt out their children. Another area of concern is the cap. I'm being told it's not a true 2% cap. And some schools are telling me they may have a 0% cap this year. And they're not going to be able to do that. What do we need to look at there, right? Pre-K, kindergarten. I mean, it's known that you can have pre-K, but if you don't continue with kindergarten, all right, there's no benefit. And many of our schools in the suburban areas, I know of schools, one of my school districts actually has a lottery for kindergarten. So what happens is some schools, you know, some kids will go into kindergarten, and other schools, the parents have to pay out of their pockets to the school district in order for their child to go to kindergarten. What are we doing about that? One other thing is some schools wrote their own curriculum to comply with the standards, and they're very happy with the curriculum. Why aren't we looking at reimbursing those school districts for the money they laid out? Have them submit it to the state, and if the state adopts their curriculum, they reimburse the school districts for the expense of creating the curriculum. That would give us homegrown curriculum written by our teachers, which are the best teachers, some of the best teachers in the country. Why keep buying it off companies when we're seeing curriculum that's horrific? Diplomas. We keep giving fancy names to diplomas. And these kids can't even get in the service with the diplomas that we're trying to give them. When I went to school, we had a Regents diploma and a general diploma. We had an education track and a career track. There's nothing wrong with being an electrician or a plumber. They make more money than a lot of lawyers that I know that came out of school. Okay? So I just think that once the government intruded, every level of government intruded into education, they screwed it all up. Right? We got to get government out of our classrooms and let teachers teach. Now, the curriculum that we've had has been so structured that teachers basically are teaching to the middle of the class, and that's it. And they're passing these kids by. When I was taught to teach, you taught to the middle of the class. You gave seat work to reinforce what you taught. You gave the kids that were a little advanced a little harder work to do, not to punish them, but to keep them engaged. But that gave us an opportunity to get to the children that didn't get the concept and explain it in a different way. The way our curriculum now, they don't have the opportunity to do that. They're leaving these kids by the wayside. So it's not going to be better, it's going to be worse. What are you doing to address that? Plus, with the structure, the way it is with heroin, what I've heard out there is in the lower grades, you have resource officers. But once you get to the middle school and you get to the high school, you want to do peer-to-peer stuff. But the structure of the curriculum doesn't allow for that, and that's been cut out of our schools. And that's a big concern out there throughout the state. I think I've pretty much hit everything. I know if I think about it, I'll hit a few more things.
Maybe we ought to set up an appointment. We can specifically, I'm going to try to get through several of these.
Yeah, but if you can go through this, oh, you have no time limit. It's me that has a time limit. So I'll try to check them off as you go on. And if you
Okay.
miss one, I'll let you know.
Let's see if I wrote fast enough. And so you mentioned the Pearson test.
Yes.
You're absolutely accurate. We had the Pearson test. We're transitioning. There is much more involvement of teachers in the development of the test. For this spring, they're reviewing, as I said earlier, they're reviewing the passages and they're reviewing the questions. And we are shortening up each of the tests from grades 3 through 8 in both language arts and mathematics.
IEPs?
Pardon me?
The IEPs, are we ignoring them? Because we were ignoring them.
Yes. So as you're aware, the federal government requires that we have that students who have an IEP and are students with special needs, they must take the same test. That is something that we have requested waivers on that. We have not received them in New York. However, now with the new ESSA law, we anticipate that we will have some flexibility and opportunity, and as we move towards computer-based testing, it will allow us to have the students start the test and then drop to the level that's appropriate for them to function better. So we anticipate that that's going to help us, but it'll be a while, and we still are requesting, as we move into this new era with the new federal law, that we would be able to, as a state, there's a plan to have 7 states receive a grant to try some more creative approaches to assessment, and we're hoping that we can be one of those states in New York, and that we can then use that opportunity to develop different assessments for our students with IEPs.
Okay. Kath?
The issue of the age appropriateness of students, it has been an issue. As I traveled around the state, I heard that a lot, that there are students that in kindergarten, in first grade, second grade, they feel like that the standards are too stretching for them, and we are going to be reviewing all the standards. The most feedback we got for both English, language arts, and mathematics was in the early grades from kindergarten to grade 4 and then kindergarten to grade 3. So it'll be an area that's going to get much attention. On the career track, we do have in the state of New York the opportunity for a local diploma. We presented that 2 weeks ago to our regents. They were, some of them weren't as familiar with it. However, it is in place, and we do have that as an availability for students. However, we also have a CDOS credential that comes, and we're expanding that to be part of our options, our pathway options, so that students can learn the ways of work, et cetera, those soft skills on what's necessary to be a good employee, and also have opportunities to go out in the field with a particular career in mind. So those are all options that we're expanding, and the whole concept of pathways for graduation opens up lots of opportunities. You still need to keep it rigorous so that it means something to have a diploma from New York State schools, but it can within that context, it can also be something that's very relevant for students and prepares them for either taking a certification test which is when you said that you had been in a program earlier, or you knew about programs at the time that you were in school. We used to have that as a technology or another opportunity for kids to go out immediately into a career. Now, we are expanding those, and right now we have 14 certification tests that can be part of the 4+1 graduation pathways, and we're expanding it up. As we see the tests, we're expanding to include those tests.
We need a general diploma so the kids can even get into the service, though.
That would probably be the equivalent of the local diploma now. And you talked about a curriculum right now, the plan and the recommendation that came from the task force was very clearly to put the curriculum development in the hands of the local districts. Once we identify these are the standards, and the assessments are revolved around the standards, the curriculum and what's done in the classroom should be a local decision. And as a matter of fact, the work that's been done by many teachers is being shared with other teachers in the state, so that in fact it can be great work that's done and somebody else doesn't have to do it again. And we've had the opportunity, Chancellor Farina from New York has made it available, the curriculum that it was developed in New York City, so that it can be available. We're putting it online for our teachers so that they can see and use and work off of some great work done in the city. And we have other models that we are expanding as well. New Visions is a not-for-profit that's done some great curriculum work, and we're using that as an opportunity for our teachers to have a model to use. We clearly still have the modules that are on Engage New York. Those, many teachers really like those. They should never have been a restrictive kind of thing. They should have been a model that could be used, not to be scripted, but rather as an option for teachers. That's what we want to do, and it's important, I believe, for local control of the curriculum, working with teachers to develop what they feel is most relevant for the kids that they have in their classroom.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for a tremendous, really a great response.
I got an extra 5 minutes out of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Senator Comrie.
Before that, I'd just like to introduce Assemblywoman Hooper and Assemblyman Tone as join us.
And Assemblyman Butler.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning.
The governor spoke in his State of the State speech about community schools and the community school environment. Can you give us some details, if you have any, about what his vision is for the community school environment that he's talking about putting in, and if there are any definitive plans on what it looks like, if it's going to include nonprofit groups that are going to be in the school? What is any detail on that, please?
Yes. Well, the whole concept of a community school is that the school be a center point to provide opportunities to access supports for children and families that attend that school and are in that community. And it, depending on the needs of the community, it can look very different. I've visited schools in New York City that have not-for-profits that actually have offices and work all the day in the school with students and teachers and staff. And I've also visited schools in other places where the concept of a community school is that after school there's lots of opportunities for students to have access to programming that might not be included in the regular academic day, and those kinds of connections to social services and resources that are available in the community. So you might have a United Way program, you might have a Boys and Girls Club program or a YMCA program. So the question that you had about not-for-profits, that is a very common model that is used where not-for-profits become part of providing services for the families and children at that school.
So I noticed that you didn't have it in your presentation. Is there a dollar amount that has been attached to it, or And if there's a committee that's working to put it together, since you're saying it's going to be shaped according to the needs of the district, just to remind you, I represent Queens school districts 29, 28, and 27 primarily. One of our issues is that we have some of the longest commute times for any parent in New York City coming from the edge of Queens in a transportation desert. Most parents have to leave work at 7 o'clock. Leave for work at 7 o'clock in the morning. They don't get home until 7 o'clock at night. We don't have any type of community school program in any of those districts right now. I'd really like to see how that's going to be shaped, who's going to be part of shaping it, so that there's a universal model that can be. I know that it needs to be interchangeable parts for different districts and different areas, but there needs to be at least one consistent model that we can work from, so that it's not a hodgepodge of different things that don't work. I benefited from attending a school that was open until 7 o'clock at night. It made a big difference in my growing up, and I think that we need to have that model for all schools, frankly, across the state, where we can have children staying in school and off the streets. So I hope that we can start to work to that model to make sure that that's a statewide model as well. Is there a plan or a process that's going to help set up that community school program, and who's going to be involved in it?
Well, the proposal that is part of the executive budget provides $100 million in new community school aids, with $75 million available for struggling and persistently struggling schools that are in receivership. $25 million would be available for other high-needs districts identified under the Needs Resource Capacity Index. So that's kind of the overarching discussion that's already been made, and it's part of that executive budget. I would agree with you that it's important for us to provide a model. Now, as you pointed out, some schools and districts find specific things that they need for their families. Providing the opportunity for open schools early in the morning for parents that can accommodate parents that go to work early, and after school, I think is a very important model, and particularly in middle school. That is a time when having consistent kind of activities after school keeps kids doing the right things. And so we don't have any more information on that, and we are very supportive of community schools. I am concerned that if a school that was in receivership, so it fits the criteria that's discussed there, has already done the community school and started it, would they have access to the funding under the proposal? And I think those are all things that need to be worked out.
I hope we can be part of those discussions, and that those discussions are that we have an opportunity to weigh in on those things, to make sure that we have the right providers and the right model so that it's done. Even in schools where they're trying to do it already, I think there's some confusion about what the proper way is to shape it and where those continued resources are going to come from. Second question, the governor had a program to upgrade technology and infrastructure and Wi-Fi access in the schools. Can you give us an update on where that is and how it's moving forward?
Yes. So that's the Smart Schools Bond, and we have approximately, the districts are providing the proposals. We are helping them through our RIC centers that are dispersed around the state to come up with what is a positive approach to how they expend those funds. The breakdown of proposed expenditures, there are 6 categories that are allowed under the Smart Schools Bond Act. Those include classroom connectivity, community connectivity, classroom technology, the pre-K classrooms, high-tech security, and the replacement of transportable classroom units. So those are the things that are allowed under the Smart Schools Bond Act. Proposals for this have been submitted and are put through our facilities review group, and we're processing those to get them out.
So those are being processed by your information and technology staff, or is it something
No.
that each school district has to apply for, each community or municipality have to apply for? How does that get broken down?
So it was approved in 2014 so that they could acquire the technology equipment, install the broadband, and construct and enhance their education facilities, and install high-tech security. Those are the things that are allowed under it. They have to send proposals to us for the expenditures, and then they are able to expend that funds after that approval.